Welcome to our channel. Please hit the subscribe button so that you'll be notified whenever our new video comes out. Death and the King's Horseman is a play by the Nobel Prize winning playwright Wole Soyinka, published in 1975. It is important to note that in the prologue, Soyinka had cautioned against reductionist tendency of adding the facile tag of clash of cultures, a prejudicial label to Death and the King's Horseman. This 5-act dramatic tragedy takes place in Nigeria during the time of World War II. The play is based on real events that took place in Oyo, Yoruba city of Nigeria in 1946. Elesin, the chief horseman, had to commit ritual suicide to accompany the deceased king of a Nigerian village to heaven, but was stopped by the English district commissioner. In Act 1, as the sun began to set, Elesin, the king's horseman, joyfully danced his way through the bustling market as he couldn't wait to join the women there. He reassured his praise singer that he intended to embrace death eventually, but for now, he desired the women to adorn him in splendid attire and savor the pleasures of life. The praise singer lamented how the white slavers came and bore away the mind and muscle of our race, but their culture was never wrenched from its true course. To demonstrate his unwavering commitment, Elesin swayed and sang the tale of the not-I bird. This peculiar bird travels to people, animals, and gods, announcing that it's time to depart this world. While all others refused and hid, Elesin proudly proclaimed that when the bird arrived for him, he welcomed its call without hesitation, as he declared, "My reign is loosened. I am master of my fate." As he shared this story, the market women, led by Iyaloja, the mother of the market, gathered around him, joining in the dance. Together, they engaged in a spirited call-and-response chant, where Elesin assured them of his readiness to embrace his destiny because life has an end. A life that will outlive fame and friendship begs another name. Elesin got upset when the women praised him as an honorable man. They didn't understand what they did wrong, but Elesin eventually admitted that he just wanted them to dress him nicely. Then, a beautiful young woman who entered the market distracted him. Upon Elesin's inquiry, Iyaloja reluctantly explained that the woman was already betrothed to her son, which irked Elesin. Still, he insisted that since it was his last day on earth, he should be allowed to marry her, have a child, and leave it as a farewell gift to travel light when dying. Despite Iyaloja's attempts to dissuade him, she eventually agreed that your last strength be plowed back into the womb that gave you being. She informed him that she would prepare both his bridal chambers and burial shrouds, but he should complete the ritual and leave no curse behind. Elesin responded that his bride should be the one who performs the burial rites. Act 2 begins in the evening of the same day. At the district officer's house, Simon Pilkings and his wife, Jane, danced in egungun costumes in their living room. Egungun are ancestral ceremonial costumes worn by Yoruba men to honor the dead. The native sergeant, Amusa, arrived with news but was upset when he saw the egungun attire. He refused to look at Pilkings or share the information because how can man talk against death to person in uniform of death? An irate Pilkings exclaimed it's simply hammering against a brick wall, particularly because Amusa was a Muslim, so he shouldn't be disturbed by any mumbo-jumbo. Eventually, Pilkings commanded Amusa to write down his report. Amusa's report was alarming, stating Elesin Oba intended to commit death, which Amusa claimed was a crime. Pilkings and Jane feared that Elesin planned to kill someone, so Jane proposed to miss their costume ball to address this issue, but Pilkings decided to arrest Elesin. They called Joseph, their converted Christian houseboy, who clarified that Elesin intended to sacrifice himself to accompany the deceased king to the afterlife. Pilkings had sent Elesin's eldest son, Olland, to England for medical training 4 years ago, despite Elesin's resistance. Pilkings insulted the locals as sly, devious bastards when Jane realized Olland would be the next King's Horseman. Pilkings became infuriated after Joseph explained the sounds of drumming of both a wedding and a death. Jane insisted again that they stayed home to handle the situation, but Pilkings sent Joseph to the police station with a note and instructed Jane to shut up, woman, and get your things on, and informed her that the prince will attend the ball, so they must also. Act 3 takes place back in the bustling market. Amusa and his fellow officers face resistance from a group of women as they try to reach the stall adorned in a rich cloth. These women taunted Amusa for serving the English, insulted his manhood by calling him a eunuch, and accused him of trespassing. They refused to let him get closer to Elesin, who they believed would demonstrate his strength to the white man by taking his own life. Iyaloja, attempting to intercede, surprisingly joined the women in ridiculing Amusa. Some young girls playfully stole the officers' batons and hat and mimicked the Englishmen, making fun of their accents. This infuriated Amusa, but Ialoja refused to support him, so eventually Amusa and his team gave up and left. The women joyfully danced as Elesin emerged from the stall holding a white folded velvet cloth, having consummated his marriage to a new wife. He spoke of the future resting on the child she will bear, and the cloth represented the union of life and seeds of passage. Elesin listened to the rhythmic drums in a daze, narrated events, and moved towards his impending fate. The women danced alongside him as he mentioned the impending deaths of the king's dog and horse, stating, "I have freed myself of earth, and now it's getting dark. Strange voices guide my feet." The praise singer reminded Elesin of his duty and asked if he saw the dark groom and master of life, while Elesin sank deeper into his trance. Act 4 starts at the ball, the band music announcing the prince's arrival. The prince was intrigued by the Gungan costumes, but the resident quickly took Pilkings aside to discuss a note from Amusa informing about Elesin's suicide. The resident reminded Pilkings to stay watchful to upkeep the empire. The resident questioned if Amusa was part of the riot, but Amusa remained silent in the presence of a Gungan attire. Pilkings discharged him at the strike of midnight and left with the other policemen, leaving Jane anxious about Elesin's fate. Holland, who had come back from England, found Jane and revealed that she didn't grasp her costume's significance as an Englishwoman, declaring, "I discovered you have no respect for the things you do not understand." They talked about the ongoing World War II and the ethics of self-sacrifice, which Holland declares to be an affirmative commentary on life. Jane refused to reveal Pilkings' whereabouts and was stunned when Holland explained his mission to ensure Elesin's honorable death. Jane became distressed as Holland compared war casualties to mass suicide, and they listened to Elesin's final moments by noting the drums beating. Jane sent the resident's aide-de-camp, Bob, away when he noticed her. Holland explained the reason behind his calmness was how it was their duty, and had begun mourning his father when he heard the king's death, and excused himself to be with his father's body. They heard Pilkings talk off stage about restraining people, and then he came on stage to call for the aide-de-camp and refused to let Holland go, thinking Holland to be a voice of reason who will talk sense to dissuade the locals from the ritual suicide. He marched away to discuss with the aide-de-camp to put Elesin in the old cellar, where slaves were once placed, before shipping them away. Holland and Jane heard an enraged Elesin shouting at the white men to not touch him. He was brought into view and collapsed at Holland's feet. Elesin got devastated as Holland, before walking away, coldly insulted him that "I have no father, eater of leftovers." Act 5 began in a small cell, chained at the wrists. Elesin stood gazing at the moon. 2 guards were inside with him, while his bride sat quietly outside. Pilkings chatted about how peaceful the night was, but Elesin disagreed, blaming Pilkings as the ghostly one for ruining his life and others. Pilkings insisted on doing his duty, but Elesin clarified he was not dying now since he was meant to die before at a certain hour. He didn't blame Pilkings entirely, but believed he was prevented from fulfilling his purpose and having his son stolen from him. Pilkings offered some comfort, but Elesin felt he had lost his honor and fatherly title. After Pilkings left, Elesin partly blamed the abomination of the white man who came violently, the gods, and his new bride for making him desire life's pleasures, as she was the final gift of the living to their emissary to the land of the ancestors. Pilkings and Jane returned, debating whether to allow visits from Holland and Ialoja. Elesin guaranteed Pilkings that nothing worse would happen if Ialoja visited. Ialoja admonished Elesin that he had dishonored himself and the world. Ialoja insisted on Elesin fulfilling certain duties to release their king in the afterlife. The women arrived with a covered object that Ialoja declared was the burden and the king's courier, in whose ear Elesin needed to whisper to release the king. The cloth-covered object turned out to be Holland's body. A distraught Elesin was reminded of his duty by the praise singer. In despair, he strangled himself with the help of the chains around his neck. Pilkings tried to revive him, but Ialoja stopped him, blaming Pilkings for disrespecting native customs by to prevent one death you will actually make other deaths. Ah, great is the wisdom of the white race. The bride shut Elesin's eyes and tipped dirt on them, and Ialoja led her away while advising her to think of her unborn child. Colonialism is a dominant theme in the play, as it takes place during the British colonial rule in Nigeria. The collision between British colonial forces and Yoruba traditions stresses the destructive influence of colonial powers on indigenous cultures and traditions. The interference of Pilkings, the British colonial officer, disrupts the Yoruba rituals, which leads to tragic deaths of both Elesin and Holland. Elesin was chained in a cellar where former slaves were locked to be shipped to away. Pilking's attempt to restrain Elesin and send Holland abroad without his father's consent are examples of the colonial force's attempts to exert control over African bodies and subdue the natives' agency. The colonial forces mock the native belief system by disrespecting local culture in the form unabashedly wearing the sacred Egungun costumes at a fancy dress ball and imprisoning Elesin. The interplay between life and death is a crucial theme, symbolized by the Yoruba ritual of transition from the earthly realm to the afterlife. The play delves into the cultural significance of death as a natural part of life and the consequences of disrupting this balance. Death and the King's Horseman revolves around the ritualized transition of the king from life to death, emphasizing the strong cultural importance of this event. Elesin had about a month to prepare for his death, but through his actions of wanting to be dressed in good clothes, teasing with the market women and taking a bride just hours before his appointed demise indicates Elesin's desire for worldly pleasures and his attraction towards life more than death. The natives suppose death as just a transition from the world of the living to the world of the dead, while the Europeans hold the notion of life being more sacred and valuable. Pilkings tries to stop the ritual suicide and Jane disagrees with Holland on the topic of the ship's captain to sacrifice himself to save others. The theme of responsibility and duty is evident in Elesin's role as the King's Horseman. He is entrusted with the vital task of accompanying the deceased king to the afterlife. Elesin's sense of honorable duty compels him to carry out the ritual suicide, as he believes it is his sacred responsibility. But his failure to do so results in a tragic chain of events, including both his and Holland's deaths. After Elesin's failure to commit to his duty, Holland dies in his father's stead in a bid to do his duty to maintain cosmic order. On the other hand, Pilkings can also be seen as carrying out his duty, that is, upholding his British laws in the colonized nation. One of the significant themes in the play is the tension between individual will and societal expectations. Elesin, the King's Horseman, is caught in a conflict between his personal desires and his duty to perform the ritual suicide required by Yoruba tradition. This struggle represents the battle between his individual will and the mass psychology of the Yoruba community. The theme of female power is explored through the character of Ialoja, the market woman leader, who holds significant influence in Yoruba society. Despite the predominantly patriarchal structure, women, particularly Ialoja, exert considerable authority. Her ability to rally the women of the market, directly confront Elesin and Pilkings, and influence events demonstrates the powerful role women can play in a society even when men hold formal positions of authority. The women of the market, particularly the young girls, resists the attempts of Amusa and the local police by denying them entry into the market, mocking them administrative powers and sending the police back, displaying the strength and agency of women in the Yoruba society. But the mutinous and silent compliance of the nameless bride as an object for Elesin's pleasure contrasts this loud female agency. On the other hand, Jane Pilkings, representing the Western woman, openly questions her husband's choices and voices her opinions, but she is repeatedly disregarded, told to shut up and comply by her husband in a show of misogyny.